So this right here is the Royal Enfield 650 Classic. And I've got to say, this might be Royal Enfield's nicest looking motorcycle. See, the problem was with the 350, it looks absolutely spectacular. But on a big wide open country like Australia, 20 horsepower is not really enough to get the job done in a lot of situations. Is it too good to be true? Are there any problems with this bike? Does it have enough power to get the job done? Well, we're going to find out all of those things in this review of the Royal Enfield Classic 650. Perfect, picturesque moment. Beautiful farmlands. This is a fitting spot for this spectacular motorcycle. I mean, my goodness, just look at this thing. Everywhere you tap, metal, metal, metal. No plastics, no shortcuts. And on a bike this affordable, that is absolutely shocking because you can spend twice the money and get half the quality on some motorcycles these days. So the looks are just staggering to me. Now, I've seen a few comments on other YouTube videos talking about how this doesn't quite have the aesthetic panache, if you will, of the 350 Classic. I completely disagree. In some ways, I think the twin cylinder in this is a little more my vibe. Now, I'll tell you a funny story about this particular color. I saw this on the internet, and I'm not gonna lie, I vomited a little bit in my mouth. But seeing it in person, I now think it's my favorite. So it looks absolutely spectacular in real life with this teal sparkly paint, with the polished engine casing and the chrome exhaust. It looks pretty much perfect. The only criticism I would have of this entire setup are the fins right here on the parallel twin. They do kind of stand out a tiny bit, but that is just such a minor criticism to what is ultimately just a beautiful bike. I cannot believe that for what you pay for this bike, this is what you get. It's so much bike for the money, and I think that's why they're so damn popular. We know this 650 well, parallel twin, roughly 650 cc's or thereabouts, 270-degree crank, so it sounds absolutely magic. Which is a big part of its character as well as its look of the engine itself. So that's really important, I think, to just how popular this engine is. But then you've got that roughly 46 horsepower and the 52 Newton meters of torque. Sadly, it doesn't get the 56 Newton meters of torque that the Bear has because of that 2-into-1 system. This has got the 2-into-2 pipe like every other 650, so it's a little bit down on torque. You do notice it just the tiniest bit, but it certainly isn't to the point where you think, gee, they really made a mistake here. So I think it's got enough power. And it's also got that all-important 6-speed gearbox, which has a decent spread and is just as good at slow speed through the traffic, country roads, as well as bombing along on the highway. Now, to put that into context though, here in Australia, the maximum speed you can go, at least in my state, is 110. There are exemptions to that. Now, of course, you need more than that to overtake, particularly with the huge trucks and road trains we have here in Australia. So you do need a bit of boogie to get past those big trucks out on the open road. And I can tell you this has enough. It's fine on the highway. Bang it down a couple of gears and you'll absolutely fly past most traffic. In fact, this bike is quicker than most cars on the road. For the most part, this has got more than enough to keep you ahead of traffic and keep you engaged and having fun. I certainly enjoyed it. These are the Leatt 7.5 Adventure Hydro Dry gloves. They're warm, waterproof, and comfortable. The best thing I love about these gloves is they're versatile. These are great because they look just as good on this 650 Classic riding along as they do on a dual sport or an adventure bike riding properly off-road. Chuck in the code SOLID10 at pekin.au's website and you'll get 10% off these gloves and everything else on their website. Let's talk about suspension next, as that's a really important factor of the handling and just the comfort experience of the bike. And what I will say is the suspension is actually pretty good on this bike. I was really surprised. I was kind of expecting this to be quite harsh at the rear like the Super Meteor 650, given that this is based quite heavily off that bike, but it does get different rear suspension to the Super Meteor and it really benefits from that. So it's actually a decent ride. Now, I will say it's on the firm side, but it's the kind of firm good, a lot like the Himalayan 450 behind me. It's the kind of firm where it actually soaks everything up and it never gets to the point where it's jarring. And that is really quite confidence inspiring because it leads to a really nice planted feeling on the road. It doesn't feel too squishy and wallowy in the corners. There's no bouncing around. So it actually feels like quite sporty and capable suspension. Now, there are limits to that. Obviously, it's budget suspension, no adjustment at the front, preload only at the rear. But for the price, you really can't ask for more. And I think it's fairly well-rounded suspension for the type of riding that you could expect to be doing on this bike. It doesn't tip into the corners super twitchy and feel like a sport bike. It really does feel just really nice, predictable. You do have to tip it into a corner, but once it's there, it holds the line really well. It's a real gentlemanly experience, I guess. It's a great bike. The suspension, the feeling of the dynamics of the handling really suit that 650 Classic aura that it has. You just kind of waft along on the back roads, ducking and weaving through the corners in this real predictable and planted way. Let's get into the braking. This is the same as every other Royal Enfield in the 650 class. It's got a single 320mm front disc with the Byberry front caliper as well. Does a decent job of pulling you up at a decent clip. It's not going to be super sport quick, but it's going to be adequate. And it makes up for it with the bigger rear disc as well. You can brake fairly adequately with this bike. I will say though that the brakes, like a lot of Royal Enfields I've ridden, case in point with my 450, the rear brake did have a squeal. So that got a little bit irritating, but I found it pulled me up very quickly in all situations and I never felt like it needed more brakes. It's the kind of bike where you're not really riding at 10/10, competent and predictable, and that's exactly what's on this Royal Enfield. I felt that I fit the bike really well. Now I'm average height at about 182-ish centimeters. I think this is going to fit most people. If you're pushing say 6'1", 6'2", I think you might find some problems depending on your body makeup. What I experienced, this was all day comfortable. The bars were in a great position. The rider triangle was great. It was a really nice neutral riding position. This has got mid pegs as well. It's part of the appeal of this bike to some people at least, that it doesn't have the forward pegs like the Super Meteor. This has got the mid pegs. The bars were in a really nice position for me too. I didn't feel any pain in my shoulders or discomfort. And the bars are actually quite narrow as well, compared to a lot of cruisers, like say my V-Star has really wide beach bars. These having slightly narrow but perfectly adequate bars meant that I was able to filter through traffic almost immediately and quite confidently. This bike would be really good as a commuter because it's quite a narrow machine. So I think it's got quite a lot going for it for being a very versatile bike that you can commute during the week and take down to the cafe and be an absolute showstopper on the weekend. The seat is really nice. It's much better than what's on the Himalayan 450. Basically, it's an all-day seat. I was comfortable all day. I'm not a fairly heavy set bloke, so I've got a fairly bony bum, so I tend to notice fairly crappy seats fairly quickly. And the other notable spec when we're talking about performance I think is important here is the wet weight, which is listed at 243 kilograms with 90% fuel in it. This bike has a 14.8 litre fuel tank. It's going to get you a decent range. I rode all day on basically 3/4 of a tank from the dealership and didn't have to fill it up. And Royal Enfield have done a good job of having a practical amount of fuel, but having a really nice looking tank as well. Now you can see I'm pretty up on this bike. I liked it a lot, but it certainly wasn't perfect. And there are some things we need to talk about that definitely get onto the frustration list for me that you need to be aware of. It's a little hard if you've got average size or large size feet to get your foot in under the gear lever. Another frustration I've got with this bike is the wheels. They look fantastic. They really set the bike off. They're a 1918 wheel setup. The only frustration I've got is that they're tubed wheels. Now, Royal Enfield say that's to keep the classic vibe and true to the spirit of the bike. I call it just damn lazy and trying to cut costs. They could easily do tubeless wheels here. One thing I was explaining is that this kickstand is a faff because the foot peg here is in the way when you want to kick it up. And when you want to try and kick it back down, it's right there on the exhaust where it gets quite hot. But you also do have the center stand, which is a nice addition. So it's a give and take, but it is a bit of a faff down there. The other thing that is not quite a frustration, but it just took a little bit of time to get used to, is where the speedo is located, and it's out of your direct vision a little bit. It's not quite as accentuated as a cruiser where it's on your tank. I think it's one of those things that might be a little bit annoying the first few rides that you have, but after owning this bike a little while, your brain will get used to the action and you'll completely forget that it's a problem at all. Squeaky brakes. This is something that's affected my bike as well. Now this could have been because it's so new, and I've read on forums that this is pretty common. The dealer said so as well, that after a few thousand kilometers, it goes away. And I think in 2025, Royal Enfield could do better with that. I'm hard pressed to think of a better value bike in the modern classic genre at the moment. It's got enough power for the highway and to have a little bit of fun. It's far cheaper than a Bonneville or a V7 or name your other modern classic motorcycle. And the look is absolutely beautiful in my opinion. It really is eye-catching, which is what you want in a modern classic. A little bit of a sense of occasion, something special to wheel out of the garage and down to the local cafe, or like me, up into the hills for the day. And this has just been the perfect little bike. It's great for the back roads. It's handled the highway all day. Sure, she's not the most powerful, but when it comes to looks, there's not much better than that. And when you consider how value orientated this bike is, it's just gobsmacking that Royal Enfield have been able to manage to do what they've wanted to do. Anyway, I've got my final jaunt back to the city, and then I've got to say my farewells. I'll have to say goodbye, but I don't want to. Even the bees like the bike. Got off.